heavy breather on the line, or maybe a hang-up phone call. A cold letter mailed to taunt police or a victim's family. A mean-spirited email meant to inflict pain on its recipient. What do all of these things have in common? They're all various modes of communication connected to shocking crimes going back decades. I'm Mike Morford, host of the podcast Killer Communications, and in every episode, I tell the story of a case involving some form of sinister contact, whether it's to a victim, their family, police, or the press. For the senders of these communications, it's bold and brazen. For the recipients, it can be frightening or downright terrifying. And you won't believe just how often it happens. Check out Killer Communications right now everywhere you listen to podcasts, and be sure to subscribe so you don't miss an episode.
You're listening to DNA ID, brought to you by AbJack Entertainment. Be sure to check out some of the other great true crime podcasts from this network, including The Murder in My Family, Missing Persons, Scene of the Crime, Zodiac Speaking,
Beyond Bizarre True Crime,
Citizen Detective, and
Campus Killings.
all of these podcasts are available for you to binge on right now, wherever you listen to podcasts. Subscribe where you're listening to this podcast so you don't miss an episode.
It was 1983. Idella Williams and Evelyn Gary were doing what they did every day in sunny Delray Beach, Florida, fishing in the canal. But on this Friday, October 21st, it wasn't just fish in the muddy water. They saw what they thought was a Hispanic male bobbing partially under the surface. The call to police came in at 5:35 p.m., and responding deputies from the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office met Evelyn at the payphone she called from at Atlantic and US 441. Following Evelyn 1.9 miles down US 441, they arrived at Acme Dairy Road and US 441, also known as State Road 7, at 5:44 p.m. There was indeed a body in the water. The deputies secured the scene and waited for detective and crime scene units. Deputy Ross spoke with Idella. She told him she and Evelyn had been fishing at that exact same spot the day before, October 20th, and had left the area around 6:30 p.m. There was no body floating in the water at that time. She returned on the 21st with Evelyn at about 5:15, and that's when they saw the body. New Palm Beach Sheriff's Detective William J. Springer would cut his homicide teeth on this horrific case. He arrived at the scene and noted that the body lay in the middle of the canal, right under a 45-foot-long wooden plank bridge spanning it. Looking into the water, he could see a partially submerged white woman. She was nude. Her legs hung downward into the water, but her head, face, right arm, right shoulder, and right breast were protruding above the murky surface. Her face and neck were bloody, and she had something around her neck. At around 7:30 p.m., the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office crime scene investigators arrived with their van of equipment. CSI Detective DeBattista took photos of the bridge and the canal. Close inspection revealed 2 drops of dried blood on the inner railing of the bridge right above the victim, and smeared blood on the outside of the middle railing. It was evident that the woman, almost certainly already bloodied and dead, had been dumped off the bridge over the railing into the water. Then it was time to retrieve the body from the water. Around 7:45 p.m., deputies Andrea and Dauenheimer of the Harbor Patrol Unit of the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office used 2 ropes, lowering them from the bridge into the water and around the right arm of the body, which was stiffened from rigor. They then towed the body to the west shore of the canal bank. There, Detective Springer and Detective DeBattista could examine it. The body fished out of the canal was a white woman with shoulder-length brown hair and hazel eyes. She wore no jewelry and didn't even have pierced ears, but she had numerous fillings in her teeth that might be able to identify her. The detectives noted that she had hair under her armpits and she was very tan, as if she was often outside. The item around her throat proved to be some kind of webbed belt. The black belt was tightened around her throat with some of her hair trapped underneath it. The Underwater Recovery Unit report reflects that they estimated the age of the woman in the water at about 20 years old. On the drowning category list, homicide was circled in pen. This was not a boating accident. This woman was deliberately killed and had likely been thrown into the water when she was already dead. Dr. Hoban, an assistant medical examiner from the Palm Beach County Medical Examiner's Office, arrived at 8:15. He conducted an external exam of the body, which was in full rigor, and noted that the body temperature was 84 degrees. The woman had evident wounds. One was a cut on the top of the left thumb that ran across the knuckle area and ran very deep into the fleshy part of the thumb. There was blood under the nail as well. Dr. Hogan posited this slice to the thumb was a defensive wound, indicating that a very sharp cutting instrument had been used. The Jane Doe had bruises on her forearms and her left breast. She also had blood in her scalp. The detectives examined the webbed black belt around Jane Doe's neck, described to me as not a belt for pants, but the kind of strap used to secure things like loads on trucks or camping equipment. It was 3/4 of an inch wide and constructed of woven nylon. The strap was secured at the back of her neck by a metal hasp. But Dr. Hoban could see that Jane Doe's throat appeared to have been cut just below the black webbed belt. Efforts to undo the belt were fruitless, so Detective DeBattista used a utility blade to cut the belt. Once they got the belt off, they saw that Jane Doe's throat had indeed been cut, and on the right side of her neck were 2 additional lacerations. Detective DeBattista took the temperature of the canal water and found that it was 80 degrees. Using this information, Dr. Hogan guessed that the woman's possible time of death was about 10 hours earlier. The body was then removed to the medical examiner's office by ambulance personnel Sven Patterson and Thomas Hurst. The ambulance was escorted to its destination by crime scene detective Paul Friedman. Detective Springer and CSI Detective Free started searching the area around the crime scene for potential evidence. Right near the bridge on Acme Dairy Road, they found several Budweiser beer cans and an old Milwaukee beer can. These appeared to be fresh, meaning they hadn't been lying in the roadway for long. However, later they would learn that no latent prints were obtained from processing the cans. Divers from the Sheriff's Harbor Patrol, Deputies Gamage, Courtney, and Andrea, plumbed the 5-foot depths of the canal looking for the murder weapon or any evidence, but found nothing. Detective DeBattista went up in a helicopter overhead, also looking for evidence and taking aerial photographs of the scene. Detective Springer started stopping cars that were driving along Acme Dairy Road. A Peggy Hernandez reported that her husband had been returning home on the 20th and had seen a man and a woman sitting in a maroon-colored vehicle parked east of the bridge on Acme Dairy Road that was a trash dumping site. Notes were made to locate this vehicle. Detective Terry Marvin, Detective Bill Bass, Detective Don Ugliano, and Detective Paul Colombo were dispatched to canvass the area. Acme Dairy Farm Road runs from US 441 5 miles to Boynton Beach Road. The 40-foot-wide canal the woman's body was in ran north-south, parallel to 441. A second canal ran perpendicular to that canal, east-west, and ended at US 441. The area was very remote, with wide-open farmland and no houses within a mile. Pumping stations for hydrating the crops were the only nearby structures. Nonetheless, the farmhouses and worker trailers in the area were canvassed, with detectives showing a Polaroid of Jane Doe to see if anyone in the area knew her. Administrators, farmhands, and employees of J&N Farms and Perro Farms, the 2 largest landowners in the area, were spoken to see if they had seen anything. Quote, "This canvass produced no helpful information," end quote. No one knew who Jane Doe was or had seen a white woman who looked out of place, was hitchhiking, or who had asked for help. Later, Detective Springer contacted the drainage district regarding the Lake Worth drainage and determined the locks had not been opened, so the water flow in the canal would have been at a standstill or minimal at best. This meant that the Jane Doe had not washed down from elsewhere. She was dumped pretty much where she was found, confirming the theory that she had been thrown over the bridge railing, leaving blood on it as she fell. Detective Springer also looked into any vehicles that had been towed or had been in traffic accidents or received traffic citations in the area. The crime scene having been searched, photographed, and measured, the area canvassed, and the paperwork completed, the Palm Beach County law enforcement personnel pulled up stakes and left the area. Their investigation going forward had to focus on identifying their victim, Jane Doe. At Jane Doe's autopsy, she was documented as very thin, standing 5 foot 8 inches tall but weighing only between 90 and 100 pounds. Her wounds were carefully documenting. Bruising on Jane Doe's inside left forearm resembled finger marks. She also had bruises on her left breast, behind her left ear, and on her right buttock. 2 stab wounds had been inflicted to her left frontal scalp area, and she had a nasty cut on her left thumb that was believed to be a defensive wound as she fought her knife-wielding attacker. The cause of death was strangulation and multiple incised wounds to the throat. 3 lacerations began under her right ear and extended to the left side of the throat. She would have lost a lot of blood wherever the slashes to her throat were inflicted. Scalp and pubic hair standards, fingernail scrapings, and rolled fingerprints were collected from Jane Doe. Anal and oral swabs proved negative for seminal fluid, but vaginal swabs detected sperm from a type O secretor. Jane Doe herself had type B blood. It was unknown how long she'd been in the canal, but it was estimated to have been no more than 12 to 24 hours. The fingerprints obtained from the canal Jane Doe at her autopsy failed to lead to any identification through either the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office, Dade County, or the FDLE. A bolo was sent out to all the law enforcement agencies in the area with a photo and description of Canal Jane Doe, asking for any information about her identity. A bolo was also sent to the FDLE, asking for a line search of any missing persons in the state agency's database who might fit the description of Jane Doe. Detective Terry Marvin was assigned to check through all missing persons reports of local women. Combing through the reports, he eliminated them by prints or description or both. If he couldn't rule them out, he contacted the families of these women and confirmed, using the photo of Jane Doe, that she was none of them. He also followed up on teletypes from other agencies, with possible identifications for Canal Jane Doe, women named Karen N. and Connie E., and one by one ruled them out. After checking the missing persons reports, various detectives were assigned old-school investigative tasks in order to try to identify the body in the canal. One detective was assigned to check the methadone clinics in the area, bringing the photo of the victim in to see if she was a patron. Another was assigned to figure out whether the woman in the canal could be a missing woman named Lena S., who had been reported as a runaway from Delray Beach. She had a record for marijuana possession, but her prints were not on file. The detective contacted Lena's juvenile probation officer, who looked at a picture of Jane Doe and ruled her out. And then they received a report that would send the investigators down a complex and promising, but eventually wrong path. For myriad reasons, Jane Doe was deemed likely to have been a sex worker. Hearing of the woman's body found in the canal, a Sergeant Dasher of the Delray substation of the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office notified the investigators that a missing sex worker fit the description of the woman in the canal. Her name was Kelly S., and her territory was the Germantown 10th Avenue area in Delray Beach. Photos of the Canal Jane Doe shown to the Palm Beach County personnel who were familiar with Kelly S. confirmed that it could be her. But it turned out that Kelly S. was alive and well. Police officers quickly spotted her plying her trade on the streets and brought her in. They showed her the picture of the dead woman, and she thought she looked like a sex worker who also worked the area of 10th and Germantown. She might have worked for a Spanish male named Pancho. Investigators looked through their book of mugshots of sex workers they had arrested and didn't find one that they thought could be their Jane Doe, but they soon got a promising tip. Officers in Delray Beach had been in contact with a sex worker named Margaret K., who reported that she knew of a missing sex worker named T. T was a white female independent sex worker who hung out in the area of Southwest 9th Avenue in Delray Beach. Margaret was worried about T because she hadn't seen her in a while. And Margaret had taken a John to an abandoned crack house in Delray, and there had found T's abandoned personal items, her Marlboros and cigarette lighter, her blouse, and her clogs. Detective Springer interviewed Margaret K. and got some more information about this missing T. Margaret looked at the photo of Canal Jane Doe and thought she could be T. Margaret gave some information on who T had last been seen with. She had been seen leaving the area on October 20th in the company of a black John whom Margaret recognized. Her own transactional interaction with him a month earlier had been very bad. He stole the $80 in cash she had on her and raped her by choking her and hitting her over the head with a claw hammer. The detectives worked with Margaret to create a composite sketch of the John whom T had left with. On October 22nd, they sent out an updated bolo advising that the unidentified white female found in the canal was a possible drug user and sex worker with the street name of T. This bolo requested that all police departments check their known files for any sex workers with the street name T. Meanwhile, detectives Springer, Free, and De Batista went to the location in Delray where Margaret said she found T's cigarettes, lighter, clothes, and shoes. It was a dilapidated, abandoned house which was clearly housing squatters. Garbage and debris were scattered all around, and people had clearly been living in the structure. Detective Springer noted blood spattered on the outside north wall, along with several packs of empty Benson and Hedges cigarettes. Some wooden clogs lay on the ground. Nearby were some pieces of women's clothing, like a skirt, a blue sweater, and underwear. One of the clothing items appeared to have dried blood on it. Outside the abandoned house, Detective Free found a branch with a clump of brown hair on it that looked consistent with Jane Doe's hair. And 10 feet away from this was a broken butcher knife with its tip stuck in the grass. A pinkish substance was on the blade. The handle lay on the ground 6 feet away. These 3 items of possible evidence were sent to the lab for comparison against Canal Jane Doe's hair and blood type. It looked very much as though something bloody had gone down in this godforsaken spot, right around the time that presumed sex worker Jane Doe had been found naked with her throat cut. An undercover officer from the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office was embedded in the drug underworld in this area, and the PBSO investigators queried him about who sex worker Jane Doe could be. They learned the names of a whole series of men who had been arrested for drugs and violent crimes in the area and/or were known pimps or Johns, men with names like Smoke and Cruz. They tracked down all these men and no one recognized Jane Doe. The investigators doggedly continued a thorough canvass of the drug and sex trade area of 10th and Germantown. They showed everyone the photo of Jane Doe and followed up on leads from those interactions. They were told Jane Doe worked the streets, she worked at a club, she worked at a bar, she was seen at a park buying drugs. They did a lot of work to try to identify Jane Doe. The first 44 pages of the 200-page police report documents these efforts. There were at least 8 detectives whose names appeared in the reports. But one significant name was glaringly missing from all these reports, the real name of Canal Jane Doe. Detectives kept at it. They called all the motels in the area asking if any large amounts of blood had been found in any of the rooms. They looked into similar rape cases employing bindings and knives. They had an artist create a rendering of Jane Doe that would be more appropriate to publish in the newspapers than her DOA photo, and circulated the drawing to all local papers and TV stations. They took the image into bars, restaurants, and convenience stores throughout Delray Beach. They also left photos of Jane Doe at local clinics and mental health facilities and canvassed homeless encampments. Nothing. Jane Doe seemed doomed to remain a Jane Doe. On October 25, 1983, Detective Springer's report stated, "This will conclude this portion of the investigation, this investigation to be considered as other." In other words, we are tabling this pending new information. Well, the next day, the detectives got a break. The Jane Doe's fingerprints had been submitted via fax to a number of databases, and all came back with no match, until the FBI got a hit. There was no match in their criminal file, but the civilian print file contained a match. They finally knew who she was. She was not a sex worker, drug addict, or vagrant. She was Gayla Ann McNeil. But detectives could not find out a lot about her. At this point, a nationwide bolo was sent out seeking information on Gayla McNeil, and detectives started making calls trying to find Gayla's next of kin. They contacted the FBI to obtain her military records and see who was listed as her next of kin there. They received 2 addresses in Springfield, Ohio. A phone call to the Springfield police put them in touch with a Detective Roof, who made contact with a Donna Minich, Gayla's aunt. And soon, Detective Springer got a call from Colleen F., Gayla's sister. Let's talk about who Gayla was. Gayla Ann McNeil was born on September 4, 1953, at Patterson Air Force Base in Springfield, Ohio. Her family was stationed there because Gayla's father, Joseph McNeil, was a lifelong military man. Gayla's mother was Patricia Schuster. Gayla had a sister, Colleen, and a brother, Bradley. Gayla's parents divorced, and her father remarried a woman named Gayla McNeil. Gayla graduated from Springfield North High School in 1972 and enlisted in the Air Force on June 12th of that year. A year later, she was in the paper in June 1973 for being part of the new female color guard from Patrick Air Force Base. Gayla was an airman first class at the time. She eventually was stationed at Cape Canaveral, Florida. Later in our story, I will reveal why Gayla left the military and what I believe the impact of that milestone was on the remainder of her life. For now, Gayla remained living in Florida. Gayla was described by her friend Fred as someone who was very artistic and also enjoyed writing. She was a person with strong convictions who stood up for what she believed in, but also chafed at societal norms and strictures. For example, she butted heads with the mayor of Cape Canaveral when her application to operate a cultural bookstore was denied. She and a friend named Patricia opened and operated G&P Cleaning instead, but Gayla was very resentful that her bookstore had been rejected because someone said it might carry books deemed too salacious. In 1979, she wrote a letter to the editor that was published in Florida Today entitled, "Give Children Time, Not Things," expressing concerns about parents who indulged their children with material items but didn't actually engage with them. Gayla never married and didn't have children, so one wonders what provoked this advice. The impression I got of Gayla was someone who was a bit unsettled and dissatisfied with her lot in life, always striving for something intangible and never quite reaching it. Now, in 1983, Gayla's sister Colleen told the Florida investigators that Gayla was a very upright and trustworthy person who was fiercely independent. She wasn't particularly close with her family in Ohio and only called when the mood struck her. She had lived in Cocoa, Florida for several years, and Colleen had last heard from her over a year earlier, when Gayla wrote her a letter saying she had hitchhiked from Florida to California. Investigators ran Gayla's record in Florida and learned that she had several traffic citations in Brevard County in the 1976 to 1982 timeframe. She'd been arrested by the Brevard County Sheriff's Office on November 8th of 1982 on a warrant for operating a vehicle without a driver's license. She was released on her own recognizance. After that, she seems to have given up on the idea of driving. Detectives learned she got around by riding her bike. The last known address for Gayla was at 1418 Tate Street, Cocoa, Florida. So now, with all this new information, the investigation into Gayla's homicide took an abrupt turn. All the stuff about sex workers, johns, vagrants, and drug dealers was out the window. None of it applied to Gayla. They had to figure out who was in Gayla's inner circle and who might have wanted her dead. Detective Springer and Detective Marvin drove over to Gayla's last known address, a trailer home in a lower middle-class neighborhood on Tate Street, and noted mail in the mailbox with Gayla's name on it. No one answered the door, so they knocked on the door of the close-by neighbors, John Russell and his wife, Vivian. The Russells said Gayla had moved in about 2 months earlier. She worked as a waitress at a local restaurant called My Place. Gayla didn't have a car. She used a bike to get around, they said. Vivian said Gayla generally wore T-shirts and ragged blue jeans and had been very thin ever since they'd known her. They didn't know of any boyfriends, but they had seen 2 different men banging on her door and her windows on separate occasions. The last time the Russells had seen Gayla was Sunday, October 9th, around 8:30 a.m. Several days before this, they had seen her sitting outside her trailer, sitting on a white suitcase. She appeared to be waiting for a ride. The detectives reached out to the owner of the trailer, Gayla's landlord Ray Fairbanks, who was very informative. Gayla had moved in on July 16th and had paid the rent for 2 months, but then had failed to mail in her rent check for September. So on October 8th, Ray went to the trailer and found that it was locked, and Gayla was nowhere to be seen, but 3 cats were locked inside. He left a note on the door telling Gayla to call him, but when he went back on October 10th, the note was still there, and there was also a note from someone named Jim asking Gayla to call him. This time, Ray called the local Animal Rescue League to come get the cats, who found them hungry and having soiled the floors inside the trailer. Ray gave it a few more days and then, on October 20th, packed up Gayla's stuff, including a partially packed white suitcase he found on the bed, and he put everything in a storage unit. The detectives asked Ray if he had noticed anything unusual in the trailer, such as blood, evidence of a struggle, or anything like that. No, he said. And in fact, he handed over photos he had taken of the inside of the trailer, which he had planned to use to ding Gayla for the mess made by her cats. They showed nothing unusual. Looking over Gayla's stuff in the storage unit, Detective Swinger noted a very interesting document from the US Air Force. It read in part, quote, Airman First Class Gayla McNeil is 21 years old and has 2 years and 5 months of active military service. Airman First Class Gayla McNeil has committed acts of sexual perversion, to wit, that Airman First Class Gayla McNeil, by her own admission, is a practicing homosexual and admitted to homosexual acts with one Linda P. during the period of April 1973 through March 1974, and on or about April 16, 1974, had a homosexual relationship with Carol G. Airman First Class Gayla McNeil was therefore considered subject to discharge for unfitness. The board recommends that Airman First Class Gayla McNeil be discharged with a dishonorable discharge, because that by her own admission, she is satisfied with her present lifestyle as a homosexual, intends to remain a homosexual, and totally disregards the need for rehabilitation." End quote. Let that sink in. Gayla had been discharged from the military because of her sexuality and for no other reason. The document makes clear that she was entirely fit to serve in every other way, including physically and mentally. This decision is illustrative of just how difficult things were for LGBTQ people in the early 1980s, and the unfairness of this whole thing obviously can't be overstated. Gayla's sister Colleen later gave an interview to the South Florida Sun-Sentinel which said that this undesired discharge from the military essentially ruined her sister's life. Gayla had aspired to be in the military and serve her country ever since she was young. Her unwavering goal had been to follow in the footsteps of her father, who was a military man. According to Colleen, the discharge, quote, changed the direction of her life because that's where she was thriving. She wanted to serve her country. Having her dream taken away from her left Gayla rootless and directionless. Of course, you can understand why the detectives were interested in this document. Remember that Gayla's autopsy showed that the Jane Doe, now known to be Gayla, had had sexual intercourse around the time of death with a man. But according to this document and information gathered by detectives from people who knew her, Gayla was an avowed lesbian and did not date men under any circumstances. Also inside the box of Gayla's possessions were important items like pay stubs, a check cashing card, a food stamp card, various business cards for local businesses, a Social Security card, a Veterans Administration patient data card reflecting an address for Gayla in Sacramento, California, and her address book. Detective Marvin interviewed another neighbor of Gayla's, Billy Lee R. He was married, and he and his wife Kathy had 3 kids, which Gayla had babysat a couple of times. Billy Lee said Gayla was very frank about being a lesbian and told him and his wife that it was a genetic predisposition. According to this couple, Gayla worked construction at Brevard Community College and also took some classes there. Billy Lee had seen a van parked at her trailer, a pale blue mid-70s model driven by a white male. He said she was good friends with an older guy named Jim who lived down the street. She had initially lived with this guy Jim for a short time before moving into the trailer. Billy Lee last saw Gayla walking on the 16th or 17th of October, wearing a plaid shirt and jeans. He had not seen her since. Detective Marvin side-eyed Billy Lee. First of all, his name was Billy Lee. Second, he had a record for burglary, larceny, grand theft, and drug offenses. Third, he admitted to being a drug dealer when he had lived in Colorado. Fourth, he said that lesbians like Gayla just needed to be shown the right way to go, unquote. Fifth, he said he had taken some trips around the state lately that violated his probation. Detective Marvin made a note to look into the dates of these trips and Billy Lee's work absentee records. Detective Marvin also spoke with a neighbor who said she was good friends with Gayla. This was Catherine G. She said Gayla was a Jehovah's Witness and a lesbian. She rode everywhere on her bike. Catherine said the last time she saw Gayla was on October 2nd and she was fine. But Catherine added that Gayla talked about the government watching her and the FBI monitoring her mail. She thought Gayla was a bit strange, but a very nice person. This information from Catherine was the first indication that Gayla might have been suffering from delusions. It has to be said that many people who interacted with Gayla reported that she seemed to have had some kind of mental break in the weeks before her disappearance. She was seen talking to herself, acting bizarrely, making religious references and talking about reincarnation, saying she lived in the woods when she didn't, and so on. Even her mailman told the detectives that she was an odd lady. Detective Springer called everyone in Gayla's address book. Most of them were friends she had met through various jobs. One of them was the man named Fred, whom I mentioned earlier. He had no idea who had killed Gayla, as he hadn't seen her recently. Another was a man named Douglas T., a construction worker who had known Gayla for several years. He said they saw each other a couple of times a week, and he'd given Gayla rides at times, but he hadn't seen her since he fixed the flat tire on her bike. He didn't know where she'd gone, and he also didn't know where her bike was. Police never found it. On November 1st, Detectives Springer and Dave Shoemaker interviewed James T., Jim, whom Gayla had lived with rent-free for a month until she moved into her trailer. Jim was known as a local go-to when people needed temporary housing. He confirmed that he was the Jim who had left a note on Gayla's door. He said Gayla was quiet, religious, and didn't have many friends. He had last seen her around the 1st of October sitting on a suitcase outside her trailer. So, detectives had a bunch of vague sightings of Gayla in the weeks leading up to her death. The last one, by Billy Lee, was on October 16th or 17th, and Gayla was wearing a plaid shirt and jeans. They needed to narrow down the time frame. Remember that Gayla had been dead for a maximum of 24 hours when she was found. Where had she been in the day or two before that, and who was she with? Detectives went to the My Place restaurant on South Cocoa Boulevard, where Gayla had worked. The owner and a waitress both said that Gayla did not like men. She and the owner had had a blow-up about her approach to waitressing, and Gayla had quit. The waitress, Pam, said Gayla rode her bike around at all hours of the night and didn't appear to be afraid of anything. But she also seemed depressed at times and expressed dissatisfaction with her life. Another waitress, Cheryl, told Detective Springer that Gayla smoked pot and bought it in the, quote, black section of Cocoa. She had once confronted some drug dealers who had ripped her off and got the weed they owed her. Gayla seemed to be very brave. Gayla had also worked at the Howard Johnson's Motor Lodge and Burger Chef. The detectives made the rounds, talking to people who remembered her. Apparently, she had not gotten along with most of the Burger Chef employees, and even mentioned that two, Kelly R. and Sherry C., were trying to kill her. Gayla had also pulled a knife on a male employee and threatened to castrate him because she felt he was acting in a threatening manner towards her. These employments did not last long, and her coworkers described her as strange. Lily T., the manager of Mr. Donut, knew Gayla well. She said Gayla had been working a construction job at Brevard Community College, but had left in the fall of 1982 to go to California to marry a woman named Melody. This relationship had fallen apart, and Gayla returned to Florida. Lily had last seen Gayla a few weeks earlier. She'd come in and said she had no money, was unemployed, and was living in the woods west of Cocoa. Lily comped her a cup of coffee. On the 31st, Detectives Marvin and Springer started to canvass all the so-called gay bars on the Dixie Highway in the Lake Worth and West Palm Beach areas. Copies of the bolo were left with the bartenders to show around. Several people recognized her but had not seen her in some time. A bartender at Evening Edition reported that Gayla had been seeing a woman named Shirley Y. Shirley was from Cape Canaveral. She came in and spoke with detectives. She had last seen Gayla at Evening Editions on October 1st, and Gayla had not been well. She was broke, disheveled, and seemed depressed. Shirley bought her some beers, and Gayla had told her she had hitchhiked to the bar and was going to hitchhike home when it was time to leave. Shirley confirmed that Gayla was an avowed lesbian and had never dated men. She described Gayla as a loner. As I said, detectives had a very hard time pinning down the exact date on which Gayla had last been seen. A canvass of the neighbors informed them that about a week and a half before she was found dead, Gayla had gotten a flat tire on her bike. Perhaps that was why she'd been seen waiting for a ride. But no one knew who had picked her up, if anyone. The PBSO investigators expanded their scope. Detectives Springer and Marvin distributed bolos about the case to all the county police agencies and asked them to check through their recent police contact field interview cards. They distributed flyers with Gayla's photo to all the towns in Palm Beach County. They canvassed all businesses in Lake Worth, Lucerne, and surrounding areas. Detective Stringer called around to all the motels in the Lake Worth area to see if any large amounts of blood had been found. He and Detective Marvin took Gayla's state ID photo and canvassed the businesses along US 1 South asking if anyone had seen her. Detective Springer also checked with the food stamp authorities and learned that Gayla had failed to show up for her appointment on October 11th. On the 30th, Detective Springer received a phone call from a George M., who thought he had seen Gayla. He'd been following the stories in the paper about the murder and said on October 17th, he had seen a mid-20s, early 30s, thin white woman with brown hair, wearing a tan flannel shirt and jeans and carrying a bag. She looked like a hippie. She was picked up around 2 p.m. by a car with 2, possibly 3 white males, driving a dark, late 70s American-made sedan, possibly a Ford Fairmont. This was on Lake Worth Road heading westbound. The car pulled over, the male passenger got out, the woman got into the front seat, and the passenger got back in. He and the woman were laughing, but George said the men looked like men he would not let his daughter get into a car with. George was not certain the woman was Gayla, unable to identify her photo as the woman he saw, but the sighting seemed promising, especially because, remember, Gayla's neighbor Billy Lee had seen her walking down the road in a plaid shirt and jeans in a similar time frame. And then information started to roll in from other law enforcement agencies who had received the teletypes about Gayla and had reports to share with the PBSO investigators. And these reports helped narrow down the timeline of Gayla's last days. On October 20th, 1983, just a day before she was found, Lake Worth police officer James Saxon responded to a call at 5:59 p.m. about a suspicious person flagging down cars. He arrived in front of Lake Worth City Hall at Lucerne and Dixie, and he saw a white woman walking on the roadway carrying a bag. He pulled over and spoke with her, and she identified herself as Gayla McNeil. She had no identification and was wearing very well-worn ripped jeans and a faded brown flannel shirt and a brown elastic sweatband and leather thong sandals. She appeared unkempt and in need of a bath with dirty fingernails. The bag she was carrying was a clear plastic bag and appeared to contain clothing. She was also carrying an unidentified long, thin piece of wooden board. Officer Saxon asked what she was up to, and she said she was traveling from Cocoa to Fort Lauderdale. His report stated that she was very polite, calling him sir and responding clearly and lucidly to his questions. But she was also very mellow, so he thought she seemed slightly out of it. He ran her through the system and found no outstanding warrants, so he gave her the all clear. He advised her not to hitchhike, since it was illegal in the city of Lake Worth, and went on his way. He last saw her walking south on Dixie Highway at 4th Avenue. Officer Saxon identified the photo of Gayla McNeil shown to him by Detective Springer as the hitchhiker who had given him the name Gayla McNeil. Okay, so now they had an idea where Gayla had been on the day before she was found slain and that she was hitching a ride. The investigation pivoted once again to the working theory that Gayla ignored Officer Saxon's warning and accepted a ride with someone she should not have. Police offered a reward of up to $1,000 available to anyone who could provide any information leading to a conviction in Gayla's case. Palm Beach County Sheriff's Detective Lieutenant Rick Paulus said to the South Florida Sun-Sentinel, quote, "If anybody gave her a ride and dropped her off, we'd like to hear from them." They also sought tips from anyone who may have seen a car near the bridge on Acme Dairy Road. On the 1st, detectives got more information indicating that Gayla had been mentally unwell prior to her disappearance. They learned that on October 10th, a Deputy Isaacs of the Brevard County Sheriff's Office on Merritt Island had had contact with Gayla. Mall security had called in a suspicious person loitering at the mall at 10 p.m. Responding Deputy Isaacs found the woman, Gayla McNeil, to be possibly mentally disturbed but coherent. She left after he spoke with her. Then on October 12th, the police interacted again with Gayla. This time, the report by Corporal Richard Bolts from 9:38 p.m. read, quote, "I discovered McNeil soaking wet, trying to sleep standing up on the pathway south of South Road 20 east of South Banana River Drive. She told me she was the female Jesus Christ and had died 3 times this week. I Form 52'd her and she was transported," end quote. Form 52 was a Baker Act involuntary hold, which permitted the police to send Gayla to a mental health facility for 72 hours. Modern detectives had to obtain a subpoena to compel the Brevard County Mental Health Facility to open their records on Gayla McNeil. Apparently, this was not Gayla's only experience at the Brevard Mental Health Center. She had been examined and evaluated there in mid-August 1983 as well. But this time, in October, she had been admitted to the Brevard County Mental Health Facility after the incident on the 12th and had been evaluated. All the police records relating to her screening are redacted for privacy reasons, as they should be. I think, given the fact that she was saying she was Jesus Christ and was behaving extremely erratically, the situation was pretty serious. But whatever mental illness was afflicting Gayla, she did not seem to want to seek treatment for it. She left the facility in what's called an elopement on October 19th at 2:30 p.m. This means that she left without authorization, in essence, escaping. The scant police report apparently says only that she crawled under a fence in the front of the facility and was not seen again. The police department in Melbourne, Florida, entered her in a police computer system as missing, so any law enforcement contact would flag her. She was described as a white female, 31 years old, 5 foot 8 inches tall, 90 pounds, with brown shoulder-length hair, wearing blue pants and a light-colored top. But the Melbourne police issuing the bolos spelled her surname McNeil wrong, which would prove disastrous. Gayla was stopped by a police officer in Stuart, Florida, later that day. I don't know the reason for the stop, but it was likely because she was hitchhiking. When the officer ran her name, he would not have located the report about the Gayla McNeil who had escaped from the mental health facility because her name had been spelled differently. The next day, when Gayla ran across Officer Saxon, the officer who got the call about the person flagging down cars in Lake Worth, again, Officer Saxon would have had no way to know about the missing psychiatric patient Gayla McNeil, and so he let her go. Within 36 hours of this contact with Officer Saxon, Gayla was dead and floating in the canal on Acme Dairy Road. How had she gotten there? Once again, the investigators had to widen their scope of inquiry. Gayla had likely come across someone as she was hitchhiking. What type of person would rape and murder a hitchhiker? Someone who was already a killer. In mid-November, Palm Beach detectives had a meeting to address all unsolved homicides in Palm Beach County and discuss possible connections. One of these was Elizabeth Ann Hucko. Elizabeth had been found deceased on September 6th in Melbourne, Florida, in Brevard County, but she lived in Lake Worth in the Bellhop Trailer Park. That's where she was last seen on September 2nd, 1983. Her 1974 Plymouth Valiant was discovered by Delray Beach police doused in gasoline and set on fire in the driveway of a South Ocean Boulevard home. They found Elizabeth's body floating in the Indian River. She was partially clothed and had been killed by a combo of strangulation and drowning in 2 feet of water. Semen was discovered in her anal swabs. Very much like Gayla, Elizabeth was a recluse and a loner. She had a history of mental illness and had lived out of her car for some time. Also, detectives noted for some reason, like Gayla, she had hair under her arms and on her legs and was universally described as unkempt. She was also very religious. There were so many similarities in victimology that connections were worth looking into. Delray Beach police obtained information that a known vehicle thief named Tony Johnson was involved in Rachel's murder. Detective Springer dug into Johnson with interest, but soon learned that his blood type did not match that of Gayla's killer. He had to move on. From November 21st to 28th, Detective Springer began a canvass of all motels from the Lake Worth area to Delray Beach. He showed Gayla's photo around and asked about any blood found, looked into the criminal histories of people who had been staying in the motels on October 20th and 21st, and asked about any unusual incidents occurring at these hotels on those dates. Quote, "These efforts met with negative results relative to any possible suspects," end quote. However, on December 5th, Detective Springer learned of a Best Western in Boynton Beach that had possible blood spatter on the ceiling. He and CSI Paul Friedman responded to the scene and brought with them a field testing kit, which revealed that the spatter was negative for blood content. They again moved on. In early December, Detective Springer learned of the arrest in the Lake Worth area of a violent offender who had absconded from parole in the state of Maryland. Robert Allen Brooks had several convictions in Maryland for robbery, assault with intent to rape, and simple assault. He had jumped parole and fled Maryland, and had been on the run starting in about November 1982. The rapes he had committed were very violent and had similarities to Gayla's case. In one instance, he had used a knife to cut his victim's throat. In another, he placed a belt around his victim's neck. In all cases, Brooks was not known to the victim and had followed her home from a bar. Detective Springer interviewed Brooks, and he denied any knowledge of Gayla's murder. There was nothing connecting him to the crime, but they searched his car and his home and found a 4-inch hunting knife under the seat of his car. On December 22nd, Detective Springer arranged for the polygraph examination of Robert Brooks. He passed the polygraph and willingly gave blood and saliva samples. Detective Springer wrote, "Due to the lack of any physical evidence and the results of the polygraph examination, Brooks at this time has been eliminated as a possible suspect in this homicide," end quote. Detective Springer's last supplemental report, dated January 30th, 1984, says, quote, "As of this date, no new suspects have been developed and no similar homicides have occurred. At this point of the investigation, due to the lack of any suspects or any investigative leads, this investigation will be considered inactive. In the event that new physical evidence or suspects are developed, this investigation to be reopened," end quote. They were out of leads, and certainly not for lack of trying. Despite talking to hundreds of people and expending thousands of man-hours pounding the pavement, they were no closer to finding out who killed Gayla than they were on day one. About a year after Gayla's murder in November 1984, a young girl walking home from a donut shop in Tampa was abducted by a man in a red car. He raped and assaulted her for more than 24 hours, but then he released her. When the survivor's clothing was examined, foreign fibers on her clothes matched fibers found on 9 homicide victims in 2 counties in Florida. According to the Boca Raton News, quote, the victim was able to describe the suspect's vehicle as being red, with a red interior and red carpet and the word Magnum on the dashboard. At that time, only the 1978 Dodge Magnum had that word on the dashboard. A task force was created, and members obtained a list of every Dodge Magnum registered in Hillsborough County, end quote. Because the rapist was cocky and drove a showy, red-all-over limited edition macho car, the task force was quickly able to zero in on Bobby Joe Long. The young rape survivor was able to identify Long as her victimizer, and Long confessed when detectives interviewed him. He admitted to a total of 10 murders of women in and around the Tampa Bay area in the 1983 to 1984 timeframe. You can see why detectives on Gayla's case were intrigued by Bobby Joe Long. His victims were 18 to 24-year-old sex workers, many of whom were strangled, although one had her throat cut. Some were found with ropes or belts around their necks. Long had also earned himself the name in the classified ad rapist for raping Palm Beach County women selling items in the paper. Long pleaded guilty and was sentenced to death. By the time the dust had settled on Long and all his appeals were exhausted, Detective Springer suspected that Bobby Joe Long had killed Gayla McNeil. In fact, he called him a prime suspect. He believed that Gayla's murder was a crime of opportunity, that she was hitchhiking and was picked up by the serial killer who liked to put straps or belts around women's necks. But when he requested the lab to test the sperm samples from Gayla's autopsy for DNA to compare to Long's, the lab discovered that the samples were unusable. The vaginal swabs, which had contained sperm, had been packaged incorrectly and had grown mold. The slides were examined under a microscope and exhibited no sperm. Detective Springer told the Boca Raton News in 2002, "I lost my best piece of evidence." In 2006, Gayla was one of 52 victims of unsolved homicides featured on a deck of playing cards distributed to inmates in the Palm Beach County Jail. Years passed, and Detective DeGidio of the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office received a phone call on January 16, 2013 from a Dean Fenton. He identified himself as the brother-in-law of Gayla McNeil. The detective had to tell Dean that there were no new updates on the case, but the conversation inspired him to review the case file to see if there were any leads that could be followed up on with newer resources or technology. He requested updated testing of the samples collected at Gayla's autopsy, the ones that had degraded and molded. Remarkably, when the lab techs swabbed the stick portion of the Q-tip-like swabs, male DNA was detected in sperm fraction on the sticks. A slide created from the vaginal swab sticks was sent to Relia Gene Technologies on January 31, 2007 for autosomal STR and YSTR analysis. This testing yielded a partial male DNA profile at 10 loci, which was sufficient for entry into CODIS. There was no match in the system. Detective DeGidio also requested testing of the blood sample collected by Detective Springer from Robert Allen Brooks years earlier. There was no match to Brooks either. Believe it or not, in 2015, Detective Bill Springer was still trying to solve Gayla's case. He told the Boca Raton News a decade earlier, "Everybody likes to solve their first case. I haven't forgotten her." It was time to talk to Bobby Joe Long, the Florida serial killer who had never been definitively ruled out. Long remained a good suspect in Detective Springer's mind because of his M.O., and because he often drove from Tampa to Fort Lauderdale, which would have taken him down US 441, where Gayla was found. Detective Springer interviewed Long at Union Correctional Institute in Rayford, Florida, on October 29, 2015. Long said he would answer Springer's questions, but he refused to provide a DNA swab to be used for comparison to the partial DNA profile in evidence in Gayla's case. Long said he had never committed any crimes in Palm Beach County. He admitted to murders in Pasco and Hillsborough counties, but these were sex workers, he said, and besides, he didn't dump any of them in canals. So Springer came away empty-handed. Instead, he submitted some samples to the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office Crime Lab Forensic Sciences Division. These samples included the vaginal smear slide and 3 vaginal swabs from Gayla's autopsy, the red skirt and blue pants found at the abandoned crack house way back in the fall of 1983, the 3 empty Budweiser cans and the old Milwaukee can found near the bridge over Gayla's canal, and hair standards and pubic hair samples from Gayla McNeil. Detective Springer received a forensic biology report dated December 29, 2015, that stated that a male DNA profile was obtained from the sperm fraction of the vaginal swabs. This was entered into CODIS in December 2015. Bobby Joe Long's DNA was in CODIS, and the lack of a match eliminated him as a suspect once and for all. Long was executed by the state of Florida in 2019. In October 2022, the Sheriff's Office received a $500,000 federal grant to pay for DNA testing in cold cases. I was told that the Palm Beach County Sheriff, Rick Bradshaw, is very committed to solving cold cases, which is very refreshing. In January 2023, the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office contracted with Othram Labs to conduct an investigative genetic genealogy analysis in Gayla's case. I don't have a lot of information on the genealogy. I know that the initial reports cited surnames Carter, Clemson, Henderson, and Hampton, and provided the names of some recommended reference testers. Detective Springer traveled to Illinois to contact 2 suspected relatives of the killer of Gayla McNeil. Both agreed to give DNA to assist the investigation. Testing of these samples allowed the genealogist to identify 3 brothers with the last name Henderson who might be their suspect: Vernon, Charles, and James. All 3 were dead. 2 had died in the 20-teens and 1 had died in 1987. Each of the 2 more recently deceased brothers, Charles and Vernon, had left living sons. DNA was collected from both. One son voluntarily gave a DNA swab to Detective Springer when told they were investigating a possible murderer in the extended family. The other son refused to give a DNA sample. He was Nathan Henderson, which is a pseudonym I'm giving him, a white male in his early 30s. So Detective Springer put a plan into place to get it anyway. On August 10, 2023, the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office Homicide Unit requested the assistance of the Tactical Unit in collecting a surreptitious DNA sample from Nathan. They conducted a background investigation to find out where he lived, who his associates were, his profession, vehicles, and so on. He had a record in Florida from 2022 for possession of an illegal substance, but nothing more serious than that. On August 17th, Tactical Unit agents parked outside and started surveilling Nicholas's house on 42nd Avenue in Vero Beach. They only had to wait a half hour. A man and a woman exited the residence and got into a Jeep Cherokee registered to Nathan Henderson. A man the officers recognized from his driver's license photo as Nathan sat in the driver's seat and the woman sat in the passenger seat. The Jeep drove away and the officers followed at a safe distance. I imagine they were fixated on the tantalizing lit cigarette Nathan was dangling out the window. The car stopped at a convenience store, but only the female passenger went into the store. When she emerged and got back into the car, Nathan drove away. As he proceeded from the convenience store parking lot north onto 27th Avenue, he dropped his smoldering cigarette butt out the window. Tactical Unit agents stopped and saw the cigarette still smoking on the blacktop. One of the agents, whose name is redacted in my file because he operates undercover, put on some latex gloves and collected the butt and placed it into a white envelope which he sealed. The envelope was placed into evidence. Testing on the 2 samples, Nathan's snagged cigarette butt and the voluntary buccal swab sample from his male first cousin, revealed that the father of each of them could not have been the killer, but a full sibling of their fathers could have. Process of elimination meant that only one brother was left: James Vincent Henderson. A press conference was held on Tuesday, April 23, 2024, to announce developments in the Gayla McNeil homicide investigation. Palm Beach Sheriff's Office Violent Crimes Division Captain Lawrence Poston revealed that a PBSO investigation led the agency to conclude that James Vincent Henderson killed Gayla McNeil. Poston talked about the original investigation and how Detective Springer and others had pounded the pavement and left no stone unturned in their quest to identify Gayla's killer, but technology was not on their side at that time. Poston continued, citing modern DNA technology as the catalyst for solving this case. He said, "Thankfully, swabs were collected from Gayla at autopsy, which identified that the victim had, in fact, probably been sexually assaulted. Those specimens were kept in evidence for all those years. And when Detective Springer came back to the sheriff's office, after retiring as a sergeant in the homicide unit, he took this case on again because this was one of those cases he was just not going to let go. We took the specimen and we were able to get a DNA profile from that, which was uploaded into CODIS, but there was no match, so it sat in CODIS for several years. Then, once the new technology involving forensic, investigative genetic genealogy evolved, Detective Springer immediately identified this as a case that would be primed for that new technology. Using that methodology, we were able to narrow it down to a suspect who we identified as James Vincent Henderson." Poston gave some basic information about Henderson. He lived in the city of West Palm Beach, and he had a relatively minor criminal record. And he was deceased, having taken his own life in 1987. He concluded with, quote, "So while we were never able to question him as to the extent of his involvement in this, we have a very strong belief that he is possibly the person who took Gayla's life." Not a very strong assertion of Henderson's complicity, but that's because, besides the DNA evidence, they had very little on Henderson. Unbelievably, Detective Bill Springer was still at it, and he made a statement requesting information. He said, "If there's anybody that might have known Mr. Henderson back in 1983, 1984, before he committed suicide in 1987, please contact us. I know he was married. I know he had a girlfriend. He didn't have any children, and he possibly worked as a mechanic for a company that repaired Florida Power and Light trucks. I'm looking for anybody that might shed some light on him, his personality, his background, what he was like, especially his ex-wife, if he was violent at all, anything like that." We are pretty much in the dark about James Vincent Henderson. With the exception of his sister, everyone who knew him is either dead or has not been located. His nephew Nathan wasn't questioned about his uncle because he never knew him. Nathan was born 3 years after Henderson died. There was no one left to tell us about Henderson. Detective Springer was circumspect about identifying the killer he had sought for 4 decades. He told the South Florida Sun-Sentinel, quote, "It's nice to know who did it, but it would be nice to be able to find out maybe why he did it, what type his personality was, if he was domestically violent," end quote. Springer told me when I asked whether it was awesome to be able to tell Gayla's family that he finally had an answer for them. He said, "It always feels great to give answers to the family. It doesn't give them closure, but it gives them answers to who did it." He said Gayla's sister Colleen had called him over the years, asking for information or making suggestions of suspects, and it felt good to finally tell her who killed Gayla. So what do we know about Henderson? James Vincent Henderson was born on October 24th, 1948 in Pahokee, Florida, to father Vernon Ashley Henderson and mother Bonita Clemson Thomas Henderson. Bonita had been married before and brought a son into the marriage with Vernon. The two went on to have 4 children together: James, brothers Vernon Dale and Francis Charles, and a sister whom I'm not naming because she's still alive. In 1968, Henderson was cited in the Palm Beach Post. Belle Glade police had an ongoing investigation into the theft of mechanics' tools in excess of $1,000 in value. This was not a one-time theft, but 2 or 3 different incidents. According to the Palm Beach Post on May 14, 1968, Detective William Love said a 19-year-old James Vincent Henderson of Lake Harbor and his buddy Albert Glass, age 17, walked into police headquarters and confessed to the theft of tools from a pickup truck owned by Mr. W.E. Cato on May 18th. Both teens were charged with grand larceny and released on $1,000 bond each. No more records are available about this incident. We know that James Vincent Henderson of Lake Harbor married a woman named Yolanda P. of Cluelston on April 4, 1970 in Palm Beach. Henderson was 21, Yolanda was 19. It appears that they divorced in 1972, although I cannot confirm that. James Vincent Henderson and Yolanda had no known children, which is why confirmatory DNA had to be gathered from Henderson's nephews. Finally, we know that at the end of his life, Henderson was living at 421 Allegra Avenue in West Palm Beach, Florida. He worked as a mechanic in West Palm Beach for a company that serviced Florida Power and Light vehicles. He took his own life at age 39 on November 24, 1987, 4 years and 1 month after he killed Gayla McNeil. I don't even know the details of his suicide. Detective Springer's final report states succinctly why they believe that James Vincent Henderson was responsible for Gayla's murder. Gayla was a lesbian and was not bisexual, yet semen was found in her vagina that traced back to Henderson. She had defensive injuries on her left thumb and contusions on her ear, left chest, and right buttock, and 2 stab wounds to her left frontal scalp area. Quote, "Based on these injuries, it is apparent that she fought her assailant and was sexually battered by him. Based on this information, I believe that probable cause has been established to arrest James Vincent Henderson for the sexual battery and murder of Gayla McNeil. Based on the fact that James Vincent Henderson is deceased, this case will be exceptionally cleared by death of the offender." End quote. Gayla's sister Colleen attended the press conference, although she didn't speak. Captain Poston told the media that the family was very grateful for their closure of the case. Colleen told the Sun-Sentinel that her sister's murder was still too painful to talk about, but that, quote, her life mattered. I want that to be known. Her family cared. So what do we think happened to Gayla? Detective Springer and I discussed his theory. He is the person who knows this case inside and out, having worked it since its inception. It was his first homicide case, and he got to close it after 40 years of patience and determination. Gayla fled from the mental health facility wearing her plaid shirt and faded, ripped jeans. She was carrying additional clothing items, perhaps ones that had been given to her at the facility. But rather than go home to her trailer where her food stamps and check-cashing card and hungry cats awaited her, for unknown reasons, Gayla decided to head to Fort Lauderdale. We know from police contacts that she was hitchhiking. And according to Detective Springer, the area she was hitchhiking in when Officer Saxon last saw her was frequented by streetwalkers. He believes that James Vincent Henderson came along and picked her up, mistaking her for a sex worker. When he came on to Gayla, who expressed her disinterest in and displeasure at his advances, he got angry. To this day, we still don't know where Gayla was killed, why the strap was placed around her throat after her throat was sliced, and what became of her clothing. But we do know that the DNA of one man was found inside her, and the bruised and battered state of her body indicated that this was wholly undesirable to her. The tragedy of this case is not only the loss of Gayla at the hands of a sadistic rapist and murderer, but that she was a victim of her times. If Gayla had been permitted to remain in the military, it is most likely that none of this would have happened to her in the first place. For no other reason than that she was true to who she was forcibly discharged, losing her livelihood, her profession, and her sense of place. She never really recovered and began a downward spiral that led her into the hands of a killer. After 40 years, Gayla McNeil's case is resolved thanks to investigative genetic genealogy. And if you are one of the bad guys, they are coming for you. Thank you so much to Detective Bill Springer of the Palm Beach Sheriff's Office for speaking with me about this case. Recently, I let listeners know about a new benefit available to them called an AbJack Insider subscription that's available through Apple Podcasts. An AbJack Insider subscription will give listeners ad-free access to every bit of DNA ID content published, both past episodes and future episodes. It will also give you benefits like early access and bonus content. Head over to Apple Podcasts and click on the DNA ID show page or the AbJack Entertainment channel to start a free trial. Thanks for listening to this episode of DNA ID. If you'd like to listen to the show ad-free and help support the show in the process, please head over to patreon.com/DNAID. And if you're interested in some fun DNA ID merch, visit the store at customizedgirl.com/s/DNAID podcast. To contact the show, please email us at dnaidpodcast@gmail.com. Follow us on social media at DNAID Podcast on Instagram, at DNAID Podcast on Twitter, or on Facebook at facebook.com/DNAID Podcast. Finally, if you want to visit our website, go to dnaidpodcast.com. You'll be able to get all the episodes of the show, leave comments on episodes that I can respond to, and you can even leave voicemails. You'll get all the latest news about the show and important updates. Find links to our social media, merch, and a lot more. It's really your one-stop shop for everything DNA ID. DNA ID is written, researched, and hosted by me, Jessica Betancourt. It's produced by me and Mike Morford of AbJack Entertainment. Music by Connor Betancourt. Check out our other collaborative podcasts, Scene of the Crime, Missing Persons, and Beyond Bizarre True Crime.